I still remember the death of Warhammer Fantasy. I was hooked on that game, warts and all. My ogres, to me, were the perfect army. Loved the miniatures, loved the Mongolian themed design, and the fact that you didn't really need that many of them was just a bit of a Brucey bonus. But when End Times happened, and they barely got any mention at all, and were basically not involved, I'll be honest, I did start to panic a little. Exactly the same as the Bretonnian and Tomb King collectors. And the rumours of Ninth, or Bubblehammer as it was known back then, just wasn't inspiring confidence in me, or many people for that matter. Then AOS dropped, and it was like almost instantly the fantasy community sort of crumbled. One of our groups, we had 7 players. All of us used to play fantasy, and overnight it just dissipated with the release of AOS. We had one of them who decided to carry on playing AOS. 2 of them decided to give Kings of War a try, and the rest of them basically either left the hobby completely or was just left wandering and aimlessly. Anyway, the group disbanded not long after that. I think it was about a week or 2 after, because no one was basically turning up, even though I was trying to get Mordheim back on the scene again. But it basically was to no avail, and that was when I started to question my faith in Games Workshop, whom at the time I was genuinely getting tired of cancelling games that I really enjoyed. It started with Mordheim, Legends of the Old West, Space Hulk basically getting a re-release in 2009 and then disappearing for about a week that I missed out on due to just an accident. And Killing Fantasy was kind of the last straw for me, especially for someone who at the time had never even looked at other companies or even acknowledged their existence. So I slowly started dipping my toe, went and got into X-Wing, but it wasn't until I saw an advertisement in my local paper for the 1 in 6 gaming group that I decided to finally pluck up the courage and go down and give it a try, because it was a group specifically dedicated to people with mental health conditions. And I think it's been 4 years that I've been going now, so yeah. But anyway, they started showing all these new games off, and I was actually enthused about trying out new systems because finally I had someone to show me the way and also know that I could actually get games in, and that this big wide open world was finally open to me. Frostgrave kicked it off, but then we decided to collectively play Dragon Rampant. A practically perfect game for anybody who wants to try fantasy outside of the mainstream of Age of Sigmar and Lord of the Rings. And the main reason for that is because you can use any fantasy models that you already have in your collection. And with it being just a simple wound system as well, you don't need a massive collection of miniatures. In fact, you can get away with just 4 on the board, because it's got a reduced model count system where you don't count the models that's actually on the board, you just count the wounds that every model has. And the simplicity of this rule set means that just after a couple of turns, you'd have basically learnt it off by heart. That's because every unit in this book has every single stat that you need on its unit option. And actions are really quite sparse, mainly limited to move, shoot, or charge. You test for each action with 2d6 dice, comparing your dice result needed to the number required on the unit's option. But be warned that nothing is ever guaranteed in this game, because the second you fail a result on any test, your turn is over. So tactics come in the form of deciding which units to actually activate first. Do you go for the safe 5+ required roll, where the unit will basically do nothing but move forwards? Or do you go for that 7+ charge, with the unit that knows that it needs to be charged or it's going to get charged in the opponent's turn and possibly lose. Then there's the amount of dice, where 12 is always required. Nobody rolls higher, and you never roll lower until you get to half the unit's wounds. And that's when you actually roll just 6d6 dice. You check what you need to roll to hit based on your unit stat. 4+ is the regular, and wounds are determined by how many dice you roll successfully versus your opponent's armour. So if you roll 6 4+s on 12 dice and your opponent has an armour of 3, then you get 2 wounds against your opponent. That armour stat is basically your only bit of protection. There's no saving throws in this game, and combat is also simultaneous. So when you charge in bravely, your opponent will also be hitting you back at exactly the same time. But it's just usually on a 6+, unless they have like counter charge or other counter charges. So there's no real guarantee that you won't lose wounds actually going into that charge and then suffering a counter charge in your opponent's turn. And then combine that with the fact that you have to take a test after you lose even 1 wound, and you can get befuddled and then just really start to struggle and maybe even potentially run off the board. But what this means is games are fast, fluid, and tactics are sort of left to a minimum, usually left for you to determine what units to activate in what order and how to counteract certain units. Like if you know that an enemy unit is gonna have a furious charge at you, you can basically measure the distance to say, yes, he's going to charge me. So you can actually reform into a shield wall, and that way that if you know that your enemy's going to charge you and be guaranteed that charge near enough, then you can shield wall, protect yourself, and then counter charge next turn once you've dealt with the enemy charge. Because if they have that charge rule, they have to charge, or at least attempt to. They can fail it. Now, does this game have faults? Of course it does. Every game has faults. But the main thing is knowing that this is really just a basic system. You're not going to get an amazing tournament level experience with this game. Saga Age of Magic, this is not. But if you are hesitant about Saga because of the cost, because it'll cost about 40 quid to get the Ages of book and then rule book, this rule set can be bought for about 5 to 7 quid on Amazon or even eBay, and it is really the only book you actually ever need. Of course, with its simplicity, you can make sort of semi-broken combos, heavily armoured bellicose foot constantly getting charges off, wizardling like cavalry, anything with 4 armour being basically hard as nails and struggling to remove them on 12 dice. And that special skill which minuses like 2 points off your unit for what is essentially a very little detriment, being probably the worst offenders. But not every list or unit is outright broken. Due to the activation system, that can basically mess up any plan you have. And the variations of scenarios in this book mean you always have a chance regardless of the list that you take. The only rule I would say that I really dislike, and essentially you should house rule, is the fact that once you've lost a couple of units, you have to start taking more and more tests, and basically you can run off the board very fast. I get rid of that rule and my group don't play with that rule, because we've had games where it's come down to like 1 unit versus 2 or 3, and that unit can just wipe out the enemy units and suddenly become like a god tier unit for some reason that's renowned, and you start talking stories about it and that becomes a fun experience, especially after a couple of months when you basically say to your group for a bit of banter, oh, how about when that unit wiped off yours? And then combining this and Dragon Rampant's core set, with the fact that people have just made fan-made rules that are free to access anytime on the internet, and the authors let them do it, it's just brilliant. I mean, you have Xenos Rampant, which is basically 40k Dragon Rampant. Eagle Rampant is the Napoleonics version. Lion Rampant's for medieval. Viking Rampant is for Vikings and Dark Ages. We have an Ancients Rampant. The Many Would Be Kings is basically Colonial Rampant. And then Rebels and Patriots is basically American Civil War Rampant. So that just shows that this is the perfect gateway game for anybody to just pick up, get units on the table, and start playing for an hour. Especially if you are a disgruntled Bretonian Tomb King or Ogres player. Blow the dust off their models and just start enjoying playing games again with them. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, why not drop me a subscribe or even check out one of the other videos YouTube recommends for you. I now have a second channel as well where I discuss movies and video games, and if that's something you're interested in, why not check it out also. Thanks for watching.